My name's Jake Morrison and I'm 16 years old. I live in a small town called Cedar Falls, Oregon, where nothing interesting ever happens. Or at least, that's what I used to think before I found out what my dad keeps in those black envelopes. See, my dad runs the only insurance office in town. He's one of those guys who's always busy, always stressed, always talking on his phone about deductibles and claims and all that boring adult stuff. But every month, on the night of the new moon, something weird happens. My dad locks himself in his office at home, pulls out this thick black envelope from his safe and does something. I never knew what. Growing up, I just figured it was work stuff. Maybe important papers or contracts or whatever. Dad's always been secretive about his business. Insurance is complicated, Jake, he'd say whenever I asked questions. Lots of moving parts. Lots of things that could go wrong if you don't handle them just right. But last month, everything changed. It started when I got suspended from school for 3 days. Yeah, I know, not exactly my finest moment. But in my defense, Trevor Banks had it coming. The guy's been picking on my little sister Emma since she started high school, calling her names, knocking her books out of her hands, typical bully garbage. So when I saw him cornering her by the lockers, I may have overreacted. Long story short, Trevor ended up with a black eye and I ended up in Principal Watson's office getting a lecture about violence not solving problems. Whatever. Sometimes problems need solving, and sometimes adults just talk too much instead of doing something about it. Anyway, being suspended meant I was stuck at home while Mom was at work and Emma was at school. Dad was at the office downtown, so I had the house to myself. Perfect time to catch up on some gaming, right? Wrong. I was in my room, headset on, completely destroying some 12-year-old kids in Call of Duty, when I heard the front door slam. Or, like rattling the windows hard. I checked the time on my computer. 2:47 p.m. Way too early for anyone to be home. Hello? I called out, pulling off my headset. No answer. But I could hear footsteps downstairs. Heavy ones. Definitely not Mom or Emma. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. Dad was standing in the hallway, but something was off about him. He looked different. Paler than usual, and his hands were shaking as he loosened his tie. His usually perfect hair was messed up and there was this weird smell in the air. Like sulfur mixed with something else. Something rotten. Dad. I started down the stairs. You okay? You're home early. He spun around like I'd scared him, and for just a second, I swear his eyes looked different. Not brown like they usually are, but almost black. Dark enough that I couldn't see his pupils. Jake. His voice sounded strained. Yeah, I'm fine. Just had to come home for something. Don't worry about it. He brushed past me and headed straight for his office. That's when I noticed he was carrying a manila envelope. Not the usual black one, but thick and stuffed with something. And there was this sound coming from inside it. Like scratching. Or maybe whispering? Dad disappeared into his office and locked the door behind him. I stood there for a minute, listening. I could hear him moving around, opening drawers, maybe talking to someone on the phone. But the weird thing was, I never heard his phone ring. I went back upstairs, but I couldn't focus on my game anymore. Something was seriously wrong. Dad never came home in the middle of the day. And what was with that envelope? The scratching sound kept playing in my head, making my skin crawl. About an hour later, I heard Dad leave again. His car started up and pulled out of the driveway, but he didn't say goodbye or anything. Just left. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was really gone, then I went down to his office. The door was still locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key. Dad's not as sneaky as he thinks he is. I grabbed it from the fake rock by the back door and let myself in. His office looked normal enough. Big wooden desk, filing cabinets, computer, the usual boring stuff. But that sulfur smell was stronger in here, and there was something else. Something that made my stomach turn. It smelled like meat. Old meat. I started looking around, checking drawers and files, but I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Everything seemed normal until I got to the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. It was locked, but Dad used the same combination for everything. Emma's birthday. 0412. Inside the drawer was a thick folder labeled Personal Confidential. My heart was pounding as I opened it. Inside were dozens of documents, all written in this weird old-fashioned script that was hard to read. But there were also photos. And when I saw them, I almost threw up. The pictures showed people. Regular-looking people from our town. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store. Mr. Patel who runs the gas station. The new teacher at Emma's school. But they weren't normal pictures. In every single one, the people looked wrong. Their eyes were too wide, their mouths hanging open like they were screaming, and their bodies were twisted in ways that didn't look human. And written on the back of each photo in red ink were dates, times, and what looked like Instructions? Commands? I couldn't make out all of it, but I caught words like collection, harvest, and payment due. My hands were shaking as I flipped through more documents. There were contracts, agreements, something that looked like a receipt book. And at the very bottom of the folder was a leather journal, bound with what looked like black ribbon but felt rough and strange under my fingers. I opened the journal to the first page and my blood went cold. Property of Charles Morrison. Record of monthly obligations. Contract initiated October 13, 1987. Terms accepted. My dad's handwriting, but from before I was even born. I flipped through the pages, and each entry was dated with the new moon. Every single month for almost 30 years. And each entry described the same thing. Payment delivered as agreed. Subject, name. Status, collected. Next obligation, date. The names were all people from our town. People I knew. People who had disappeared over the years. Mrs. Chin, who used to run the flower shop. She'd moved away suddenly a few years ago, according to what people said. Bobby Martinez, who graduated high school 2 years ahead of me and then just vanished one night. Everyone said he probably joined the military or ran off to the city. But according to Dad's journal, they hadn't moved away. They'd been collected. I was so focused on reading that I didn't hear the front door open. Didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. Didn't realize I wasn't alone anymore until I heard Dad's voice behind me. Find what you were looking for, son? I spun around, the journal still in my hands, and there he was, standing in the doorway of his office with that same pale, wrong look on his face. But this time I was sure his eyes were black. Completely black, like looking into deep water at night. Dad, I can explain? No need. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. I think it's time we had a talk. He walked over to his desk and sat down like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just caught me going through his private files. Like those files weren't full of evidence that he'd been, what? Kidnapping people? Killing them? He held up the black envelope and I swear I could hear that scratching sound again. Like something alive was trapped inside. I've been paying that price for almost 30 years now. Ever since you were born, actually. That's when the deal started. What deal? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Dad smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was wider than normal, showing too many teeth. The deal I made to keep my family safe and successful. To make sure you and Emma would have good lives. Never want for anything, never have to worry about the things most people worry about. He stood up and walked around the desk toward me. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of concrete. The insurance business is all about risk assessment, Jake. Calculating odds, determining who's likely to have accidents, who's going to file claims, who's going to cost the company money. I got very good at it. Almost supernaturally good, you might say. He laughed and the sound made my skin crawl. But that kind of knowledge, that kind of foresight, it comes with obligations. Monthly obligations. And now that you're old enough, now that you've seen what's in that folder, you're going to help me fulfill them. I don't understand. But part of me did understand. Part of me had figured it out the moment I saw those photos, those contracts, those journal entries. Dad, those people, what happened to them? They served their purpose. He was right in front of me now, close enough that I could smell that awful sulfur and rot smell coming off him. Just like you're going to serve yours. He held out the black envelope. Open it. No. I took a step back. Dad, this is insane. You're talking like you made some kind of deal with the devil or something. His laugh was even worse the second time. The devil? What, Jake? You think so small. There are things in this world, things that have been here long before humans ever existed, that are so much worse than any devil you could imagine. The envelope in his hands was moving now. Actually moving like something was writhing around inside it. And the scratching was getting louder. This contains a binding contract, son. Your binding contract. One that will ensure your family's continued prosperity for another generation. All you have to do is sign it. And if I don't? Dad's fake smile disappeared. His black eyes got even darker, if that was possible. Then the deal my father made, and his father before him, and his father before him, comes to an end. And all the protection, all the luck, all the success we've built up over the generations, it all gets collected at once. He leaned closer, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel being ground up in a garbage disposal. Your mother's cancer will come back. Emma will have that car accident she's supposed to have next month. You'll fail all your classes, never get into college, never amount to anything. And that's just the beginning. I stared at him, at this thing that looked like my father but clearly wasn't anymore. You're lying. Am I? He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a text message from Mom. Jake, honey, just got back from the doctor. Need to talk when I get home. It's important. The timestamp showed she'd sent it 10 minutes ago, while I was in Dad's office, while he was explaining how Mom's cancer would come back if I didn't sign his devil contract. How did you? I told you, son. Risk assessment. I know what's going to happen because I've spent 30 years making sure it doesn't happen. But if you don't sign this contract, if you don't take over the family obligations, then everything I've been preventing comes crashing down at once. My hands were shaking as I took the envelope from him. It felt warm, almost hot, and I swear I could feel something moving around inside it. Something alive. What do I have to do? Dad's horrible smile came back. Just sign your name at the bottom. In blood, of course. They're very particular about that. He handed me a small knife. The blade looked old, stained dark with what I hoped was rust but probably wasn't. Don't worry. It only has to be a drop or two. Just enough to make it official. I looked at the envelope in my hands, then at the knife, then at Dad. His black eyes were watching me, waiting. Patient. Like he knew I didn't have a choice. And maybe I didn't. Because if he was telling the truth, if Mom really was sick again, if Emma really was in danger, then what choice did I have? I couldn't let my family suffer because I was too scared to do what needed to be done. I opened the envelope. The contract inside was written on paper that felt wrong under my fingers. Too smooth, too warm like skin. The writing was in that same old-fashioned script I'd seen in Dad's files, but this time I could read every word clearly, like the words were writing themselves in my head instead of on the paper. Binding agreement between the Morrison family line and the entity known as the Collector, it read. Terms of service. One member of each generation shall serve as designated harvester. Monthly obligations shall be fulfilled on the night of each new moon. Payment shall be rendered in the form of one human soul, freely given by the harvester to the collector. In exchange, the Morrison family line shall be granted protection from harm, prosperity in all endeavors, and knowledge of future events as they pertain to risk assessment and financial gain. At the bottom was a signature line, next to a dark stain that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Dad, I whispered, I can't do this. You're asking me to kill people. Not kill, Jake. Harvest. There's a difference. What's the difference? Dad walked over to his window and looked out at our quiet suburban street. When you kill someone, they die and that's the end of it. When you harvest someone, well, let's just say death would be a mercy. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. I can't do this. You don't have a choice. Dad turned back to me and his face was completely calm. Matter of fact, like he was explaining how to balance a checkbook. Sign the contract, Jake. Save your family. Or don't sign it and watch everything you love crumble to dust. I looked down at the knife in my hand. Such a small thing. Just a quick cut, a drop of blood, my signature on the line. That's all it would take. But then I thought about Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store, always smiling, always asking about Emma's grades. About Mr. Patel, who let me pay for gas and quarters when I was broke. About all the people in those photos, their faces twisted with terror. There has to be another way. Dad shook his head. There's only one way, son. The way it's always been done. The way my father did it and his father before him. You sign the contract, you learn the trade, and you keep our family safe. I started to put the contract back in the envelope, but Dad grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold and way stronger than it should have been. You're not leaving this room until you sign that contract, Jake. One way or another, you're going to fulfill your obligations to the family. That's when I realized the door behind him wasn't just closed anymore. It was gone. Like completely gone. The wall was solid, unbroken. No door, no way out. And Dad was changing. His skin was getting paler, almost gray. His fingernails were growing longer, darker. And those black eyes were starting to glow with a faint red light. Sign it, Jake. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I gripped the knife tighter and looked down at the contract. At the signature line waiting for my blood. And that's when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Emma's voice calling from somewhere far away. Jake? Jake, where are you? I need help. She sounded scared, terrified, and she sounded like she was in pain. Dad's smile got even wider. Tick-tock, son. Time's running out. Emma's scream echoed through the house again, and this time I could tell she wasn't just scared. She was in agony. Real physical pain. The kind that makes you wonder if you're going to die. What did you do to her? I lunged toward Dad, but he didn't even flinch. Instead, he held up one finger and I froze mid-step. Like my whole body just stopped working. I didn't do anything, Jake. Yet. His voice was getting deeper, more distorted. But the collector is impatient. He's been waiting for a new harvester for months now. Every day you don't sign that contract, every day you delay taking over the family business, people you care about start experiencing complications. Another scream from Emma, closer this time. Like she was right outside the office, but that was impossible since there wasn't a door anymore. Let her go. I tried to move again, but my muscles wouldn't respond. She's got nothing to do with this. Dad laughed, and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard mixed with a garbage disposal. She's got everything to do with this. She's leverage, son. Motivation. Sign the contract and her pain stops. Don't sign it and, well, let's just say the collector has very creative ways of encouraging cooperation. I stared down at the contract in my hands. The words were moving now, shifting and writhing on the page like living things. And I swear I could hear whispers coming from the paper itself. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all begging, pleading, crying for help. Who are those voices? Previous harvests, Dad said casually. Everyone who's been collected over the years. They're bound to the contract now, part of the collector's collection. They help him find new targets, new souls to add to his inventory. That's sick. That's business. Dad walked over to his desk and pulled out a thick photo album. Want to see the family history? All the good work your grandfather did? Your great-grandfather? It's quite impressive, actually. He opened the album, and I immediately wished he hadn't. The first page showed a black and white photo of a man who looked like Dad but older, standing next to what looked like a mine shaft. But instead of miners coming out of the hole, there were things. Pale, twisted creatures that might have been human once but definitely weren't anymore. Grandpa Joe, Dad said proudly. He was a hell of a harvester. Got his start during the Great Depression. Lots of desperate people back then, willing to make deals for just a scrap of food or a warm place to sleep. Joe would offer them work in the mines and then, well, the collector always needs fresh souls. He flipped to the next page. Another photo, this one in color but faded. A younger Dad standing in front of what looked like a hospital. But the people coming out of the building weren't walking. They were floating, their feet dangling a few inches off the ground, their eyes rolled back in their heads. That was my first big harvest, Dad said with the pride of someone showing off their kid's report card. 1987. The whole cancer ward at Cedar Falls General. Told everyone it was an experimental treatment. Free of charge, of course. Amazing how people will trust you when they're desperate. I felt like I was going to throw up. You killed cancer patients? I harvested them. They were going to die anyway, Jake. I just expedited the process. And in return, the collector gave me the knowledge I needed to build the most successful insurance business in 3 counties. Emma screamed again, and this time I heard something else. The sound of breaking glass, like windows shattering. Or bones snapping. Sign the contract, son. Don't make her suffer because of your squeamishness. I looked down at the knife in my hand. Would be so easy. Just a quick cut across my palm, let a few drops of blood fall on the signature line, and Emma's pain would stop. Mom would be healthy. Our family would be safe and successful for another generation. All I had to do was become a monster. What if I sign it but don't actually harvest anyone? I asked. What if I just pretend to fulfill the obligations? Dad's laugh was even worse this time. You think you're the first Morrison to have that idea? You think your grandfather never tried to find loopholes? Your great-grandfather never tried to cheat the system. He flipped through more pages of the album. Photos of men who looked like family but their faces were wrong. Stretched too wide, eyes too big, mouths full of too many teeth. The collector doesn't appreciate creativity, Jake. He doesn't like it when his harvesters try to be clever. So he makes examples of them. Dad pointed to one particularly horrifying photo. That's my Uncle Robert. He tried to substitute animal souls for human ones. Thought he could fool an entity that's older than recorded history. The thing in the photo might have been human once, but now it looked like something that belonged in a nightmare. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles, its skin was the color of old milk, and its face. God, its face looked like it was melting. Robert spent 15 years as the collector's personal entertainment before he finally died. And that was a mercy killing. Another crash from somewhere in the house. Emma's voice was getting weaker, more desperate. Jake, please, help me. Something's wrong with my arms. I can't feel my arms. I closed my eyes and tried to think. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be some kind of escape clause, some loophole, something. What if I refuse? What if I just don't sign it at all? Dad's smile disappeared completely. Then the Morrison family line ends tonight. The collector calls in all debts at once. Your mother dies of cancer within the hour. Emma dies of her injuries. And you, Well, you get to live just long enough to watch it happen. Then you join the collection, and the collector finds a new family to work with. You're lying.
Am I?
Dad pulled out his phone again and showed me the screen. This time it was a video call. Mom was on the other end, but she was lying in what looked like a hospital bed. Her skin was gray, her hair was falling out, and she could barely keep her eyes open.
Jake.
Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Honey, is that you? The doctors. They don't understand what's happening. The cancer came back so fast. They're saying maybe a few hours.
Mom?
I tried to reach for the phone, but Dad pulled it away. Sign the contract, Jake. Save her. I looked at the contract again. The whispers were getting louder now, more insistent. And I was starting to make out individual words. Help us. Don't do it. Run while you can. Save yourself. But how could I save myself if it meant watching my family die? That's when I noticed something. The contract had a lot of fine print at the bottom, written in letters so small I had to squint to read them. Most of it was legal gibberish, but one clause stood out. Should the designated harvester fail to fulfill monthly obligations for a period of 3 consecutive lunar cycles, the contract shall be considered void and all previous agreements nullified. 3 months. If I could avoid harvesting anyone for 3 months, the contract would be voided. But that would mean 3 months of watching my family suffer, 3 months of the collector's motivation. Could I do it? Could I watch Emma and Mom go through hell for 3 months just to break a contract that had been in place for generations? I need time to think about this. Dad shook his head. No more time, son. Emma's condition is getting worse by the minute. And your mother? Well, let's just say modern medicine can only do so much against supernatural cancer. He grabbed my wrist again, and this time his grip was hot instead of cold. Like he was running a fever of about 1,000 degrees. Sign the contract now or lose your family forever. I raised the knife to my palm and Dad smiled with satisfaction. But instead of cutting my skin, I spun around and drove the blade into the contract itself. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The paper started bleeding. Actually bleeding like I'd stabbed a living thing. The whispers turned into screams, and the whole room started shaking like we were in an earthquake. Dad's face went from satisfied to furious in about half a second. You little fool. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I stabbed your stupid contract. Big deal. But it was a big deal. The paper was dissolving now, turning into some kind of black sludge that smelled like sulfur and death. And Dad was changing too. His skin was getting darker, more scaly. His fingernails had turned into claws, and his teeth were getting sharper and longer. The contract isn't just an agreement, Jake. It's a binding. A prison. It keeps the collector from taking whatever he wants, whenever he wants it. It limits him to 1 soul per month, keeps him from harvesting entire towns at once. The black sludge was spreading across the floor now, and everywhere it touched, the wood started rotting. You've just set him free. What do you mean, set him free? But I didn't need Dad to answer. I could hear it myself. Something big was moving around upstairs. Something that sounded like it had way too many legs and was breaking everything in its path. Emma's screaming had stopped. That was somehow worse than when she was making noise. The collector is no longer bound by the terms of our agreement, Dad said. His voice was completely different now. Lower, raspier, like he was talking through a mouthful of gravel. He can take whoever he wants, however many he wants, starting with your family and working his way through the rest of the town. The ceiling above us started to crack and something dark and wet started dripping through. But don't worry, son. He'll save you for last. He wants you to see what your heroics have accomplished. I could hear the collector moving through the house now. Heavy footsteps, the sound of furniture being smashed, walls being torn apart. And under all of that, a low humming sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. There's got to be a way to fix this. Dad laughed, but it didn't sound like Dad anymore. It sounded like something pretending to be Dad and doing a really bad job of it. The only way to fix this is to make a new contract. A better contract. One that gives the collector everything he's ever wanted. What does he want? Everyone, Jake. Every soul in Cedar Falls. Every man, woman, and child. He wants to turn this entire town into his personal collection, and thanks to your little tantrum, he's free to do it. The footsteps stopped directly above us. Then, slowly, something started pressing down on the ceiling. The plaster cracked, then crumbled, then fell away entirely. And I saw the collector for the first time. It wasn't what I expected. I'd been thinking demon, devil, monster from hell. Something with horns and fangs and a pitchfork. But this thing looked more like a giant spider made of shadows and human parts. Its body was dark and shifting, like smoke given form, but its legs were definitely human arms and legs. Dozens of them, all different sizes, all reaching and grasping and twitching. And its face. God, its face was the worst part. It had dozens of human faces, all pressed together into one horrifying mass. Men, women, children, all with their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. Jake Morrison, the collector, spoke, and its voice was every one of those faces talking at once. Thank you for freeing me from that tedious contract. I've been looking forward to expanding my collection for so long. One of its arms reached down toward me and I scrambled backward. But there was nowhere to go. The office was maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, and the collector was blocking the only exit. Don't be afraid, it continued. You'll join your family soon enough. But first, I want you to see what freedom looks like. The arm grabbed me around the waist and lifted me up through the hole in the ceiling. We passed through the first floor of the house, then the second, then burst through the roof entirely. From up there, I could see the whole town of Cedar Falls spread out below us. And it was chaos. People were running in the streets, but they weren't running towards safety. They were running in perfect formation like a marching band or a parade. All heading toward the center of town, toward the old church that had been abandoned for decades. Beautiful, isn't it? The collector's many faces smiled. Everyone moving with such purpose. Such unity. They don't even know why they're walking, but they can't stop themselves. I could see Mom down there, still in her hospital gown, stumbling along with the crowd. She looked confused and scared, but her feet kept moving forward anyway. Where's Emma? Safe, the collector said. For now. She's part of a special surprise I have planned for you. We descended toward the old church, and I could see that the doors were wide open. People were filing inside in neat rows, like they were attending Sunday service. But I knew this wasn't going to be any kind of service they'd want to attend. The collector set me down just outside the church doors. Go on in, Jake. See what your rebellion has accomplished. I walked through the doors, and what I saw inside made me want to scream. The church pews were full of people from town, but they weren't sitting normally. They were all frozen in place, their eyes closed, their faces peaceful, like they were sleeping. But I could see dark veins spreading under their skin, and their breathing was way too slow and too shallow. And at the front of the church, standing at the altar, was Emma. She looked normal except for her eyes. They were completely black, just like Dad's had been. And when she saw me, she smiled with way too many teeth. Hi, Jake, she said in a voice that definitely wasn't hers. Thanks for coming. We've been waiting for you. Behind her, carved into the wall where a cross should have been, was a symbol I'd never seen before. It looked like a tree, but the branches were made of human bones and the roots were human skulls. Welcome to the new Cedar Falls, Emma continued. Population, mine. The people in the pews started turning toward me, their black eyes opening in perfect unison. And that's when I realized that destroying the contract hadn't freed anyone. It had just made things infinitely worse. The entire congregation turned to stare at me with their black, soulless eyes, and I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I ran. Not my finest moment, I'll admit, but when your little sister is possessed by an ancient evil and an entire church full of people are about to become supernatural zombies, sometimes retreat is the better part of valor. Or whatever. I bolted out of those church doors like my butt was on fire, and I could hear the collector's laughter echoing behind me. Not just from inside the church, but from everywhere. The sky, the trees, the ground under my feet. Like the whole world had become his personal sound system. You can't run forever, Jake Morrison. His voice boomed from every direction. This is a small town. There's nowhere to hide that I won't find you. He was right, of course. Cedar Falls has maybe 3,000 people on a good day, and most of the town consists of Main Street, a couple residential neighborhoods, and a whole lot of empty farmland. Not exactly a maze of hiding spots, but I had one advantage. I'd lived here my whole life. I knew every back alley, every abandoned building, every place a desperate 16-year-old could hole up and try to figure out how to save the world. I made it about 3 blocks before I realized I was being followed. Not by the collector himself, but by some of the possessed townspeople. They weren't running after me, which was somehow worse. They were just walking. Calmly, steadily, never speeding up or slowing down. Like they knew exactly where I was going and they had all the time in the world to get there. Mrs. Patterson from next door was about 50 feet behind me, still wearing her gardening gloves and carrying a pair of pruning shears that looked way too sharp. Behind her was Mr. Rodriguez from the hardware store, carrying what looked like a nail gun. And behind him was Principal Watson, the same guy who'd suspended me just a few days ago for fighting. Seeing these people I'd known my whole life turned into something else, something wrong, it was almost worse than seeing the collector himself. At least the collector looked like a monster. These people still looked like themselves except for those horrible black eyes and the way they moved like puppets on strings. I ducked into Miller's Alley, the narrow space between the old movie theater and the pharmacy. It was dark, full of dumpsters and broken glass, and it connected to the storm drain system that ran under most of downtown. If I could get into the tunnels, maybe I could hide long enough to figure out a plan. The storm drain entrance was hidden behind a rusty grate that was supposed to be locked, but every kid in town knew the padlock had been broken for years. I squeezed through the gap and dropped down into the tunnel below. It was dark as hell down there, and the smell was like a combination of stagnant water, mold, and something else. Something dead. But it was better than being chased by zombie neighbors, so I started moving deeper into the tunnel system. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I heard voices up ahead. Real voices, not the creepy monotone of the possessed people above ground. I followed the sound and found myself in a wider section of tunnel where someone had set up a makeshift camp. There were 5 people huddled around a battery-powered lantern. Mrs. Chin from the flower shop, who was supposed to have moved away years ago, Bobby Martinez, who was supposed to have joined the military, a woman I didn't recognize, and 2 kids who looked like they were maybe in middle school. "Jake Morrison," Mrs. Chin said when she saw me. She didn't look surprised. "We've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me? How did you even know I was coming down here?" Bobby Martinez stood up, and I could see he was holding what looked like an old leather journal. The same kind of journal Dad had kept in his office. "Because we've been watching your family for years, man. Waiting for the day when someone would finally break that contract." "You wanted me to break the contract? But that's what caused all this." I gestured toward the ceiling, where we could still hear the faint sounds of people walking in formation. "The collector is free now. He's taking the whole town." "He was always going to take the whole town," the woman I didn't recognize said. She was maybe 40 with short gray hair and tired eyes. "The contract your family made wasn't protection. It was a payment plan." Mrs. Chin nodded. "Every month, your father would deliver 1 soul to keep the collector satisfied. But it was never going to be enough. The collector has been building his collection for decades, waiting until he had enough power to take everyone at once." "I don't understand." Bobby opened the journal he was carrying and showed me a page covered with names. Hundreds of names, all crossed out in red ink. "These are all the people who've been collected over the years. But they're not dead, Jake. They're stored. Kept in some kind of supernatural prison waiting? Waiting for what?" "For the collector to have enough souls to open a permanent gateway," one of the kids said. She looked like she was maybe 13 with dark hair and scared eyes. "My name's Sarah. My brother was collected 3 years ago. But sometimes late at night I can hear him calling for help. The collector feeds on human souls," the other kid explained. He was maybe a year or 2 older than Sarah with red hair and freckles. "But he doesn't just eat them. He uses them like batteries. The more souls he collects, the more powerful he gets." Mrs. Chin took the journal from Bobby and flipped to a different page. This one showed a map of Cedar Falls, but it was covered with symbols I didn't recognize. Lines connecting different buildings, circles around certain houses, arrows pointing toward the center of town. "Your great-great-grandfather didn't make a deal to protect your family," she said. "He made a deal to turn Cedar Falls into a harvesting ground. Every soul collected over the past century has been stored in a place called the repository." "Where's the repository?" "Under the old church," Bobby said. "Where do you think all those people were walking?" "The collector has been gathering them there for the final ritual." I felt sick. "Final ritual?" "He's going to combine all the stored souls with all the new ones," the unnamed woman said. "Create something called a soul engine. It'll give him enough power to break through into the real world permanently. Right now, he can only appear during certain times under certain conditions. But with a soul engine, he'll be able to manifest anywhere, anytime," Sarah finished. "And he won't be limited to one small town anymore." The implications hit me like a truck. "You're saying this is all my fault?" "No," Mrs. Chin said firmly. "This is your family's fault. Your great-great-grandfather started it, your great-grandfather continued it, your grandfather expanded it, and your father perfected it. You're the first Morrison in 5 generations who tried to stop it. But I made it worse. I freed him." "You accelerated his timeline," Bobby admitted. "But Jake, the ritual was always going to happen. We've been tracking the collection numbers for years. The collector was maybe 6 months away from having enough souls to start the process anyway. So what do we do?" The unnamed woman smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "We destroy the repository." She pulled out what looked like a stick of dynamite, except it was covered with symbols that looked like the ones from Mrs. Chen's map. "This is a soul bomb. It's designed to disrupt supernatural energy, break apart collections of bound spirits. Where did you get that? I made it, she said. My name's Dr. Elizabeth Harper. I used to work for a government department you've never heard of, dealing with supernatural threats. When I found out what was happening in Cedar Falls, I went rogue. There's a government department that deals with supernatural threats? There are a lot of things the government doesn't tell people about, Dr. Harper said. But that's not important right now. What's important is getting this bomb into the repository and setting it off before the collector can complete his ritual. How do we get into the repository? The church is full of possessed people. The storm drains connect to the old church basement, Bobby explained. There's a tunnel that leads right under the altar. We can plant the bomb there and get out before it goes off. It sounded simple enough. Maybe too simple. What's the catch? Mrs. Chin and Bobby exchanged a look. The bomb needs a trigger, Mrs. Chin said carefully. Someone has to stay behind to activate it manually. It's a suicide mission. Not necessarily, Dr. Harper said. The person who triggers the bomb might survive if they're far enough away from the repository when it goes off. But they'll definitely die if they're not. Yeah. I looked around at these 5 people who'd been hiding in the storm drains, planning a desperate mission to save a town that probably didn't even know it needed saving. They were all looking at me like I was supposed to make the decision. Why me? Why does it have to be me who decides? Because you're a Morrison, Sarah said quietly. Your family started this. It has to be a Morrison who ends it. That's not fair. No, Bobby agreed. It's not. But it's the way it is. I thought about Emma, possessed and standing at that altar. About Mom, dying of supernatural cancer in a hospital bed. About Dad, who turned into something that wasn't even human anymore. About all the people walking through the streets like zombies, heading toward their doom. If we do this, if we destroy the repository, what happens to all the people who are already collected? The ones who've been stored there for years. They'll be free, Dr. Harper said. Their souls will be released and they can finally move on to whatever comes next. What about the people who are possessed right now? The ones walking toward the church? If we stop the ritual before it's completed, the collector's hold on them should break. They'll be confused and disoriented, but they'll be themselves again. And if we don't stop it? Mrs. Chen closed her journal. Then by tomorrow morning, there won't be a Cedar Falls anymore. Just a permanent gateway for something that should never have been allowed into our world. I could hear more footsteps above us now. Heavy ones. The possessed people were spreading out, searching for us. We were running out of time. Okay, I said. Let's do it. Dr. Harper handed me the soul bomb. It was heavier than it looked and it felt warm to the touch. Like it was alive. This is armed with a 5-minute timer. Once you start it, you'll have 5 minutes to get as far away from the repository as possible. How far is far enough? We honestly don't know. This is the first time anyone's ever tried to destroy a supernatural collection this large. The explosion could level half the town, or it could just make a really bright light. There's no way to predict it. Awesome. So I might save everyone, or I might accidentally nuke Cedar Falls. Pretty much. Bobby pulled out a hand-drawn map of the storm drain system. This is the route to the church basement. It's about a 1/4 mile of tunnels, but some of them are flooded and some of them have collapsed over the years. You'll have to improvise. I studied the map, trying to memorize the turns and landmarks. What happens if I get lost down there? Then we're all screwed, Sarah said helpfully. Sarah. Mrs. Chin scolded. What? It's true. She was right, of course. If I couldn't find the repository, if I couldn't plant the bomb in the right place, if I couldn't get away in time, then the collector would complete his ritual and become something too powerful to stop. What about you guys? Where will you be? We're going to cause a distraction, Dr. Harper said. Draw as many of the possessed people away from the church as possible. Give you a clear path to the repository. How are you going to do that? Bobby grinned, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, he looked like a normal 20-year-old guy instead of a supernatural resistance fighter. Ever seen what happens when you set off fireworks in a small town at 2 in the morning? Despite everything, I almost smiled. You're going to blow stuff up. We're going to blow a lot of stuff up, Mrs. Chin confirmed. Every street light, every car alarm, every fire hydrant we can find. Make so much noise and chaos that the collector won't be able to focus on what you're doing. Dr. Harper checked her watch. It's 2:30 a.m. now. The ritual started about an hour ago, which means we probably have until sunrise to stop it. That gives us maybe 4 hours. How long will it take me to get to the repository? If everything goes perfectly? Maybe an hour. If you run into problems? She shrugged. Let's just say you better not run into problems. I tucked the soul bomb into my jacket and folded up the map. Anything else I should know? Yeah, Bobby said. If you see your dad down there, don't try to save him. He's not your dad anymore. He's been the collector's servant for so long that there might not be anything human left in him. That hit harder than I expected. What about Emma? Emma might still be savable, Mrs. Chin said carefully. The possession is recent. If we can disrupt the collector's power before the ritual is completed, she might be able to fight her way back. Might. It's the best we can offer. I stood up and shouldered my backpack. The storm drain tunnel stretched out ahead of me, dark and unknown. Somewhere in that maze was the repository, where hundreds of souls were being held prisoner. And somewhere beyond that was my little sister, being used as a puppet by something that should never have been allowed to exist. Jake, Sarah said as I started to walk away. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might screw this up. But you're trying, she said. That's more than any Morrison has done in 100 years. I nodded and started walking into the darkness. Behind me, I could hear Mrs. Chen and the others gathering their fireworks and explosives, preparing their distraction. I had 4 hours to save my town, my family, and maybe the world. No pressure. The storm drain tunnels under Cedar Falls are a lot more complicated than Bobby's hand-drawn map made them look. What he'd marked as a straight shot to the church basement turned out to be a maze of branching passages, dead ends, and flooded sections that hadn't been on any map. I'd been crawling through those tunnels for about 45 minutes when I heard the first explosion above ground. Mrs. Chin and the others had started their distraction. The sound echoed through the concrete pipes like thunder, followed by car alarms, sirens, and what sounded like half the town's electrical grid going haywire. That meant the possessed people would be drawn away from the church, giving me a clearer path to the repository. At least that was the plan. But as I got closer to my destination, I started hearing other sounds. Whispers echoing through the tunnels. Scratching noises that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. And underneath it all, a low humming that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The soul bomb in my jacket was getting warmer too. Like it was responding to whatever supernatural energy was building up ahead of me. I checked Bobby's map again by the light of my phone. According to his drawings, I should be right under the church by now. There should be a ladder leading up to a maintenance hatch that would put me directly in the basement. But all I saw ahead of me was more tunnel. Dark, wet, endless tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. That's when I realized the tunnels were changing around me. I'm not talking about normal construction changes or cave-ins or anything like that. I mean the tunnels were literally reshaping themselves as I moved through them. Passages I'd already explored were sealing themselves up behind me. New openings were appearing in walls that had been solid concrete just minutes before. The collector knew I was coming. Jake Morrison, a voice echoed through the tunnels. Not the collector's multi-voice chorus, but something else. Something familiar. Why don't you come join the family reunion? Dad's voice. But wrong, distorted, like it was being played through a broken speaker. I followed the sound deeper into the tunnel system, and the humming got louder with every step. The walls started to glow with a faint red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And the air got thicker, harder to breathe, like I was walking through invisible soup. Finally, the tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber that definitely hadn't existed under Cedar Falls yesterday. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by pillars that looked like they were made of twisted human bones. And in the center of the chamber, oh God, the repository. It wasn't a building or a room or anything normal like that. It was a tree. A massive, horrible tree made entirely of human souls. The trunk was formed from hundreds of people pressed together, their faces visible in the bark, their mouths open in silent screams. The branches were arms and legs and torsos, all intertwined and reaching toward the ceiling. And hanging from those branches like fruit were glowing orbs, each one containing what looked like a person curled up in the fetal position. The collected souls. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all hanging from this nightmare tree like Christmas ornaments. And standing at the base of the tree conducting some kind of ritual was my father. Except it wasn't my father anymore. The thing that looked like Dad was at least 8 feet tall, with skin that shifted between human flesh and something that looked like black scales. His arms were too long, his fingers ended in claws, and when he turned to look at me, his face was a horrible mixture of human features and something else. Something that had never been human at all. "There's my boy," Dad Thing said with a smile full of razor-sharp teeth. Right on time for the grand finale. Around the base of the soul tree, arranged in a perfect circle, were the people from town. All the ones who'd been walking toward the church in that zombie parade. They were standing perfectly still, their black eyes closed, their hands clasped in front of them like they were praying. And in the very center of the circle, directly in front of the soul tree, was Emma. She was floating about 3 feet off the ground, her arms spread wide, her head tilted back. Dark energy was flowing out of her and into the tree, making the trapped souls glow brighter and writhe more frantically in their branches.
Emma?
I started toward her, but Dad Thing held up one clawed hand and I froze in place. Not because I chose to stop, but because my muscles just stopped working. "Ah," Dad Thing said. "Don't interrupt the ritual. We're at a very delicate stage here. Let her go. She's just a kid." "She's a Morrison," Dad Thing replied. "And Morrisons have obligations. Emma is serving as a conduit, channeling the family's supernatural legacy into the soul engine. It's quite beautiful, really." I looked at the soul tree again and I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't just a collection of trapped souls anymore. It was transforming, growing, becoming something else. The trunk was getting thicker, the branches were spreading wider, and new faces were appearing in the bark every few seconds. "You're adding to it," I said. "The people in the circle. You're going to add them to the tree." "Very good." Dad Thing clapped his hands like I'd solved a math problem. "Yes, once the soul engine reaches critical mass, it will absorb every living soul in Cedar Falls. And then it will spread. Town by town, city by city, until the entire world is part of our collection." The soul bomb in my jacket was practically burning now. I could feel it responding to the energy in the chamber, getting more and more unstable. If I didn't plant it soon, it might go off prematurely and take me with it. But I was still frozen in place, unable to move anything except my eyes and mouth. "The best part," Dad Thing continued, "is that you're going to help us complete the ritual. See, the soul engine needs one final component. The willing sacrifice of a Morrison descendant. Someone who chooses to give up their soul to power the final transformation. I'll never do that." "Oh, but you will." Dad Thing gestured toward Emma and she started screaming. Not the possessed, otherworldly screaming from before, but normal human screaming. Like she was being tortured. "Because if you don't, your little sister is going to experience every moment of agony that every soul in this tree has ever felt. Simultaneously. For eternity." Emma's scream got louder, more desperate, and I could see tears streaming down her face. She was fighting the possession, trying to break free, but whatever was controlling her was too strong. "Stop it. Give me your soul willingly and her pain ends instantly. She'll even survive the transformation. She'll become part of the engine, but she'll retain her consciousness, her personality. She'll be immortal, Jake. Forever young, forever happy, forever part of something greater than herself." I stared at Emma, floating in the air, screaming in agony, and I almost said yes. Almost gave in. Because watching your little sister suffer when you have the power to stop it, that's not a choice any 16-year-old should have to make. But then I remembered Dr. Harper's words. The bomb needs a trigger. Someone has to stay behind to activate it manually. Maybe I couldn't save Emma by giving up my soul. But maybe I could save her and everyone else by giving up my life. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." Dad Thing's horrible smile got even wider. "Excellent. Step forward and place your hands on the tree." He released whatever supernatural force was holding me in place, and I stumbled forward toward the soul tree. The faces in the bark were all looking at me now, their eyes wide with terror and desperation. I could hear them whispering, pleading, begging me not to touch the tree. But I had to get close enough to plant the bomb. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the soul bomb, keeping it hidden behind my back. It was almost too hot to hold now, and I could feel it vibrating like it was about to explode. "Place your hands on the trunk," Dad Thing commanded, "and speak the words of willing sacrifice." I stepped right up to the soul tree, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from the trapped souls. Close enough that I could see the individual faces pressed into the bark, all of them looking at me with a mixture of hope and terror. And close enough to shove the soul bomb directly into a gap between two of the larger branches. "What are you?" Dad Thing started to say, but I was already diving away from the tree, rolling across the chamber floor toward the tunnel entrance. The soul bomb's timer was set for 5 minutes, but Dr. Harper had mentioned it might be unstable around supernatural energy. Turns out she was right. The bomb started beeping immediately, a high-pitched whine that got faster and faster. "You fool," Dad Thing roared. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Emma dropped from the air, the dark energy connection severed. She hit the ground hard but immediately started crawling toward me, her eyes back to their normal color. "Jake, what's happening?" The possessed townspeople in the circle were starting to move, their heads turning toward the beeping sound. Some of them were blinking, looking confused, like they were waking up from a dream. "Everyone out!" I shouted. "Everyone get out of here now." But it was too late. The soul bomb reached critical mass. The explosion wasn't like a normal bomb. There was no fire, no shrapnel, no concussive blast. Instead, there was light. Pure, white light that filled the entire chamber and seemed to go on forever. And in that light, I could see the souls being freed. They rose from the tree like birds taking flight, hundreds of them, thousands of them, all glowing with their own inner light. I could see Mrs. Patterson looking young and peaceful. I could see the preacher who disappeared months ago, smiling as he faded into the brightness. I could see people I didn't recognize, souls that had been trapped for decades, all finally free to move on to whatever comes next. The soul engine crumbled like a dead tree, its branches falling away, its trunk collapsing into dust. And Dad Thing was screaming as the light touched him. "This isn't possible," he shrieked. "The contract, the binding. You can't break 100 years of..." His words were cut off as he started to dissolve. The black scales fell away, the claws retracted, and for just a moment, I saw my real father underneath all that supernatural corruption. He looked at me with normal brown eyes and he mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," before he faded away completely. The collector himself materialized one last time, his spider body writhing in the cleansing light. "You think this is over, boy?" he raged. "You think you've won? I am eternal. I will find another family, another town, another..." The light consumed him and his screams faded into nothing. When the brightness finally died down, I found myself lying on the floor of what was now just a normal basement under an old church. The possessed townspeople were scattered around the room, all of them unconscious but breathing normally. And Emma was curled up next to me, alive and human and herself again. "Is it over?" she whispered. I looked around the basement. No soul tree. No supernatural energy. No humming that made my teeth ache. Just a bunch of confused people waking up from the worst nightmare of their lives. "Yeah," I said. "I think it's over." We helped the townspeople get back to the surface, where Mrs. Chin and the others were waiting with blankets and first aid supplies. Most people didn't remember much about what had happened, which was probably for the best. They remembered walking toward the church, remembered feeling like they weren't in control of their bodies, but the details were fuzzy. Dr. Harper ran some kind of supernatural energy detector around the church grounds and confirmed that the collector's presence was completely gone. The contracts that had bound my family for generations had been nullified when the repository was destroyed. "What about Mom?" I asked as the sun started to rise over Cedar Falls. "Is she still sick?" Mrs. Chin checked her phone. "I just got a text from the hospital. Your mother's cancer is gone. Completely gone. The doctors are calling it a miracle." Emma hugged me tight, and for the first time in days I felt like I could breathe normally. But there was one more thing I had to do. I went back to Dad's office at home, to the safe where he'd kept all those black envelopes. Inside, along with the contracts and photographs and journals, I found something I'd never seen before. A letter addressed to me written in Dad's handwriting. "Jake," it read. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've broken the family curse. I want you to know that everything I did, every soul I harvested, every deal I made, it was all to protect you and Emma and your mother. I thought I could control it, thought I could limit the damage, but I was wrong. The collector got stronger every year and I got weaker. By the end, I wasn't making the deals anymore. The deals were making me. I'm proud of you for finding a way to stop this. I'm proud of you for being stronger than your father, your grandfather, and all the Morrison men who came before you. You did what none of us could do. You chose to sacrifice yourself to save others, instead of sacrificing others to save yourself. Take care of Emma. Take care of your mother. And never, ever make a deal with something that promises you more than you deserve. Love, Dad." I folded up the letter and put it in my pocket. Then I took all the contracts, all the journals, all the evidence of what my family had done, and I burned it in the fireplace. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep, even as a warning. 3 months later, life in Cedar Falls was back to normal. Mom was healthy, Emma was back to being a typical high school freshman, and I was back to being a typical high school junior who just happened to have saved the world. Nobody talked about what had happened that night. Not officially. But sometimes when I walked through town, people would nod at me, give me a little smile. A quiet thank you that they didn't even seem to realize they were saying. Mrs. Chin reopened her flower shop. Bobby Martinez enrolled in community college. Dr. Harper disappeared one day, leaving only a note that said she'd been reassigned to investigate supernatural activity in some town in Montana. And me? I decided to become an insurance investigator. Not like Dad, not making deals and harvesting souls, but investigating the real thing. Making sure people get the help they need when disasters strike. Making sure nobody has to make the kinds of deals my family made just to protect the people they love. Because I learned something important that night in the repository. There's always a choice. There's always another way. And sometimes the right choice is the hardest one to make. My name is Jake Morrison, and my father used to give the devil a black envelope every month. But that ends with me. Some family traditions are worth breaking.